Grüezi und herzlich willkommen. A very warm welcome to all of you to Davos on behalf of the local organizing and the steering committee of the World Biodiversity Forum 2026. I'm Gabriela Schaepman-Strub, the chairperson of the WBF 2026, and I will lead you through this opening ceremony to get you ready for this exciting week ahead. It is no coincidence that we meet here in Davos. Davos is the place where the leaders of the world convene to discuss global urgencies. Well, biodiversity is a global urgency, as we all know, and you are the leaders on this topic. Davos is also the scenery of Zauberberg, Magic Mountain, the famous novel by Thomas Mann. The main character, Hans, travels to Davos by train, as most of you did, and met other colleagues, I understood. And Hans reflected that they must have got above the zone of shade trees, also probably of songbirds, whereupon he left such a sense of the impoverishment of life as gave him a slight attack of giddiness and nausea, and made him put his hand over his eyes for a few seconds. It passed. Well, it currently seems that many put their hands in front of their eyes when it comes to biodiversity loss worldwide, but we need to be clear that the dizziness will not pass. The draft global report on collective progress in the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, published earlier this month, will be discussed at the CBD COP17 in Yerevan in October. The message of this report is very clear. There has been a collective increase in efforts, but the world is not yet on track to collectively meet 2030 targets or the 2050 goals and vision set by the parties of the convention. A recent EU conference on transformative biodiversity change found that a gap in the engagement exists. Those responsible for biodiversity loss are not yet part of the conversation. Creating space for dialogue with these actors is necessary step forward. And they made a call for scientists to step into a more active role, not just producing knowledge, but communicating it in ways that reach policymakers, investors, and industry. That's exactly what we do here. Discuss across sectors, build networks, and leadership with and beyond science, and innovate to leave impact. Towards our WBF 2026 overarching theme, leading transformation together. So, who is here to connect about leadership and transformation for biodiversity? We are around 1,160, even more, individuals from 73 nations at this forum. So quite a crowd. With 75% researchers and 25% of participants from businesses, NGOs, governments, and others. While many of us would agree that we need to rediscuss today's dominant growth-based economic paradigm, I think a 42% growth rate since 2024 just feels about right in light of the urgency. We are not only 42% more participants, the forum has become more comprehensive, including any possible discipline and topic that relates to biodiversity, from health to ecological findings, how to generate hard numbers for biodiversity. That's a top topic, as you see, with almost 200 presentations. And finally, finances, business aspects that are so key to bend the curve, and rights of nature, values, ethical aspects, but also translational science, definitely. And we have a substantial arts, culture, and communication component. You'll hear much more about that throughout the day. And you already have encountered some of this art at the entrance or outside in the Kirchen Park. We hope you enjoyed this special exhibit made possible in collaboration with Woven Studio and many artists. We also offer 2 slots with artists introducing their pieces and live performances. For guidance in this very rich program, we provide a weekly and daily overview on the website. And don't panic about the tremendous offer this week. There are 14 sessions running in parallel. You will miss most of it anyway. Take some time off and connect with nature in beautiful Davos, and contribute an observation to one of the biodiversity citizen science databases. So WBF leaves a biodiversity monitoring footprint, and you're certainly the best one to leave that. We suggest that during the forum, you might engage in the Crazy 3 challenge. First, the knowledge challenge. Listen to one presentation that extends beyond your sector with a title that tells you nothing. I met the participant on Saturday, Gerlinde de Duin, on the road, and she told me that she is co-leading a workshop on Sunday, and she said, "It is slightly out of my comfort zone." Yes, that's exactly what we want here. We want people to be outside of the comfort zone. We want to be a platform to create and test new ideas beyond what we usually do back home or at other conferences. Second, we of course encourage you to really enjoy the opportunities here. Walk up randomly to a person and respectfully ask if they have a moment to exchange. A perfect occasion is tonight's icebreaker. Don't only hang out with your colleagues from back home. Based on all you have heard and reflected at WBF, take a note as a third challenge on an action that you want to make, and then carry it home and think of it throughout the year. Many more people would have profited from this experience here, and we think of those who cannot be with us because of health, financial, or other issues, such as not getting travel permission from their organization or because of visa issues. So let's share our reflections and impressions with those absent and with the world. Are our voices heard for biodiversity? I recently came across this study on media reports of the CBD COP against the climate COP, and you see that the media reporting, the media stories, are very much biased towards climate, so we can still do better. Well, if we then go into a different aspects at the end of the day, it is very clear who makes the global headlines. It's this lady here with the red line. She is the one that is being most searched throughout this entire period. And the interest of the society into COP climate or COP biodiversity is a bit limited, I would say. So please feel free to share your experiences, reach out with your stories and examples through social media. We also prepared a more formal message to go out from this conference. Informed by the leading theme, abstracts of sessions, workshops, and presentations, this resolution was developed, reviewed by the steering committee, and revised by a core group. The resolution is now available on the website. Among other, it contains recommendation to all relevant parties, with one, which is especially important in these times, stand for biodiversity and acknowledge nature's contributions. And we can all do that, but we also need others doing it. 2, co-create diverse visions for biodiversity futures, so really work on options that we have for the future. And 3, lead transformative change toward desirable futures. On Tuesday, there will be a workshop to co-develop and carry forward the resolution. During a celebratory moment at the conference dinner, we will ask participants to endorse the resolution by acclamation. So please take the opportunity, go to this website and read the resolution as a little homework. It will then be distributed to national and international organizations. Please feel free to share it with your network. And while you are all convening here, we already prepare for the next round, so save the date for 2028. I wanted to conclude my short opening with an important item. WBF 2026 would not be possible without funders who trust in our ambitions and see a value in supporting your and our efforts. A big thank you to diverse organizations within and beyond the University of Zurich for your generous support. Organizing a conference is a people business in the end. We are especially grateful for the support of the steering committee, including early careers who were with us for the first time and who did an amazing job. The staff of the local organizing committee who went above and beyond, student helpers, diverse staff of UZH, the Congress Center, Copernicus, and Woven Studio. Yet, we are only a part of this family assembled here. All of you made a big lift to propose sessions, prepare presentations, posters, arrange funding and travel to Davos, and provide content discussed here and leveraging impact. So a big applause to all of us. I would like to now briefly introduce the next speaker who will welcome you on behalf of the host institution, the University of Zurich. Michael Schaepman is a co-founder and enabler of the World Biodiversity Forum and the president of the University of Zurich. Michael, the floor is yours.
Dear participants, it's with great pleasure welcoming you at the World Biodiversity Forum here in Davos. Thank you very much for providing your precious time for this conference. We value your participation and contribution very much. But we also do have a request to you, but more about this later. This week is our big chance. We transform here in Davos the E from the World Economic Forum during the coming days into a B, namely the World Biodiversity Forum. We have the unique chance to be more visible and more impactful than the World Economic Forum. Why do I say so? It is just a few months ago I was sitting where you are being seated, and I think I fulfilled already the Crazy 3 challenge. I listened to a talk that was completely outside of my comfort zone. And it was very awkward during the World Economic Forum to hear how many times the word climate change, biodiversity, or sustainable disappeared from the program. So I'm very happy to observe that in this program, from this conference, the word biodiversity is almost everywhere. So just yesterday, I met with the CEO of the World Economic Forum, and we discussed that the World Biodiversity Forum is the second largest conference happening here in Davos. And you know what? We may not need a single black limousine in order to organize it. But let me iterate on why we would have a big chance to become the largest conference here in Davos. The Biodiversity Challenge is not any longer primarily about misunderstanding the problem of biodiversity. It's about implementing the solutions at scale and speed to meet the 2030 global targets. And you all can help. Now, in order to be helpful, let me put forward a few pithy statements. Are we sure that countries can reduce habitat destructions by meeting the growing demands for food, energy, and materials without externalizing the problems to others? Are we already treating climate and biodiversity policies at a seamlessly integrated fashion? Or are they still partly disparate entities, and why does it take so long to merge such policies? Or even, in my view, one of the most contentious issues are the extremely low investment levels in financing conservation, in particular in biodiversity-rich developing countries. We did commit to protecting 30% of the land and sea by 2030. But can we really expand protection while equally respecting indigenous and local community rights? And if not, where shall these land resources actually be located? Or are we just continue to assume that it is okay to take the resources from the most convenient places? I think we should reflect and invite the spiritual leaders of the world to this conference as well, because the land ownership of them is very, very large. So we should think outside of our box in order to achieve our goals. The accelerated spread of non-native species continues to alter ecosystems worldwide, occasionally alongside with the changing climate, occasionally depending on substantial human activities such as transportation. Can we prevent more effectively that a relative costly post-invasion control and interventions will take over? And if so, what are acceptable costs, speed and actions of biodiversity inventorying and monitoring? Further on, can existing food system be transformed without compromising food security? And if so, why does not everyone has this on their agenda already? And certainly, there are many measuring and monitoring activities going on to measure biodiversity. But this remains scientifically and logistically challenging. Despite eDNA, remote sensing and AI, progress for concerted and coherent global activities are not progressing well enough given the speed of things that are changing. And again, what are acceptable costs in order to inventorize biodiversity? Looking at CO2 footprints, the speed and actions of biodiversity inventorying and monitoring is currently going on. And finally, there's a big implementation gap, as we all know. Many biodiversity targets failed because national actions were insufficient or even turned back, like here in Switzerland. We need better biodiversity plans, better governance, and much clearer accountability mechanisms. So how can we move from commitments to measurable and accountable outcomes? The answers actually seem to be very easy. Here at the World Biodiversity Forum, we all have the chance to make a difference. So please make this difference. Critically reflect on your own activities, speak up and speak out. Transform the world by rigorously asking the toughest questions possible and implementing the most demanding goals jointly. We should be careful not fall into a conformity trap with a large community that cherishes the same goals, namely to preserve biodiversity. Now, if I had 3 wishes for 2026, I have 3 very simple ones. Number 1, reconciling biodiversity conservation with climate, food, population, and energy transitions. Number 2, mobilizing much more finance for nature-positive development. And number 3, delivering the Kunming-Montreal targets in practice rather than on paper or during speeches like my own. The last one about the speeches is a reminder also to myself. I think I have said enough, but let me make another 3 final statements. The University of Zurich, as a founder of the World Biodiversity Forum, is fully committed to achieving the biodiversity goals. And I'm very glad that all co-founders of the World Biodiversity Forum are present today in this room. Number 2, the University of Zurich will continue to organize the World Biodiversity Forum under the condition that you all contribute with the toughest questions and the highest scientific rigor, as well as the best policy and products to advancing biodiversity research and translation. And my third and final statement is that I have to thank everyone who was in whatever form involved in organizing or sponsoring this conference. This is an incredible job done by so many helping hands. Thank you very much. But actually, most important is that you dedicate your time to support solving the most pressing biodiversity questions in the world and for the world. So thank you very much for participating here and today. I would like to thank all the participants who take on the challenge to contribute to a just and better world. But let me conclude now by introducing someone who really knows what she's talking about. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, and I welcome Becky Chaplin-Kramer. Becky is the Global Biodiversity Lead Scientist at the World Wildlife Fund. She is advancing the science and implementation of conservation strategies to support biodiversity contributions to the people's well-being. Throughout her career, Becky has led many core activities in the framework Global Ecosystem Services, Earth Observations, and Ecosystem Service Modeling, including important translational activities resulting in products for decision-making and processes. She also was a lead author various times for IPBES, and she's now the co-chair of the IPBES Global Assessment. Dear Becky, thank you very much for your time, and we're looking forward to your speech. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was very kind. And thank you all for being here. It's such an honor to have this opportunity to speak with you. I've been asked to provide a state of the biodiversity science from the perspective of both my role in IPBES, as Michael mentioned, as the co-chair of the upcoming global assessment, as well as my work previously in the Nexus and values assessments, as well as my role at WWF as Global Biodiversity Lead Scientist. And in both roles, I'm trying to deliver the science we most need to understand and respond to the unprecedented challenges this world is facing, which means that I, like many of you, spend a lot of time delivering bad news, documenting loss, quantifying exactly how much trouble we're in. And it's hard doing this work. It's exhausting. Aren't you all exhausted? But I want to acknowledge something we don't hear often enough. The science chronicling biodiversity decline that this community has built is extraordinary. It is one of the greatest scientific achievements of our time. Without that science, we wouldn't know that 1 million species are at risk of extinction, that biodiversity is declining 2 to 6% per decade across an array of indicators, or that vertebrate population abundance has declined a whopping 73% on average since the 1970s. But we do know these numbers. We built the science that produced them and others like them. And that science has changed the world. That science gave us the Global Biodiversity Framework. It gave us the Task Force on Nature-Related Disclosures and science-based targets for nature. But moreover, it built the political will to recognize the biodiversity crisis as existential. We should be proud of that. We should celebrate it. But we should acknowledge something else too. The science of decline that built the political will to recognize the crisis isn't the science we need to solve the crisis. We've organized our entire scientific enterprise, our metrics, our modeling, our monitoring, our funding models, our sense of what counts as rigorous around documenting loss. This graph shows the number of open access peer-reviewed articles measuring biodiversity change published between 2000 and 2025. I want to draw your attention to the sizable gap between our focus on loss and our focus on recovery. To be honest with you, I expected this trend, but I was actually stunned by just how extreme it is. There are more than 8 times as many papers reporting biodiversity decline or loss as gain or recovery. Of course, one conclusion to draw from this is that there's just a lot more biodiversity loss happening than gain around the world. But it also demonstrates where our attention has been. How many of these researchers do you think set out to measure loss in a place where they already knew it was happening? How many restoration projects go undocumented, unmeasured, unpublished? We can't find what we're not looking for. We've become so adept at chronicling decline that we have to ask ourselves an uncomfortable question. Has it become a trap? Have we lost the capacity to do something else? Here's an example to bring that question into focus. For decades, monarchs have been the symbol, one of the clearest and most beloved symbols of biodiversity decline. Between the loss of their milkweed host plants from agricultural landscapes, the spread of herbicide-tolerant crops, fragmentation of their overwintering habitats in Mexico, not to mention one of the most harrowing animal migrations on the planet, it's no wonder that their numbers have been plummeting. But this year, we received astonishing news. The eastern migratory population of monarchs increased by 64% in their overwintering grounds in Mexico. 64%. Hearing this inspired in me a rare feeling for a conservation biologist: joy. But I didn't get to sit with that feeling for long because I started wondering why. Why had this happened? Was it better weather along the migration route? Was it rainfall? Was it milkweed plantings? Was it reduced disturbance in their overwintering forests? Was it some combination of all of that and a bit of good luck? If we can't explain why recovery happened, we can't replicate it. We can't scale it. We can't invite farmers and cities and local protected area managers and transportation authorities and other forms of government to join us in making it happen again, or understand the roles that they can play in doing so. We can celebrate the rebound, but we can't yet turn it into a pathway. And that is the trap I'm talking about. When nature gives us a glimpse of recovery, we often don't have the science in place to understand it. Oh, excuse me. Now, I know some of you are thinking, the timing couldn't be worse to talk about anything else than loss. Many climate commitments are quietly, or in the case of my country, not so quietly being shelved. Funding for environmental science is under attack. We're backsliding on so many fronts at the exact moment that we need to be accelerating. All true. But I want to suggest that this is exactly the right time for this conversation. Because pendulums swing and windows of opportunity open. They always have. And we have to meet the moment when it arrives. Think about the Montreal Protocol. By the mid-1980s, the science on ozone depletion was clear, and more importantly, it was actionable. Researchers hadn't just diagnosed the problem. They'd mapped the pathway to a solution. The pendulum was moving, and the protocol was signed within 2 years of the scientific consensus. And that protocol has had dramatic results. This image comes from NASA, and it shows how in 1971, the ozone layer was intact across Antarctica. That's the globe in green. But by 2017, after decades of CFC emissions, you can see the hole in blue and purple. But here's the story that matters for us, the curve at the bottom. The Montreal Protocol was signed in 1987 and fully enacted by 1989. And after that point, you can see the ozone depletion start to bottom out in that curve and start to recover. The two globes on the right are projections, but full or near full recovery is expected by 2065. This is what a recovery curve looks like when the science is ready and a political window opens. We talk about bending the curve for biodiversity loss all the time. But how is our science preparing the way? People in our field like to think that we don't have anything to learn from the Montreal Protocol because it was too simple, too easy. One class of pollutants, one set of solutions. But maybe it was easy precisely because the science was ready. Maybe the lesson isn't about the simplicity of the problem, but the readiness of the science. And if we look around right now, we can see the pendulum starting to move. Renewable energy is no longer just competitive with fossil fuels, it's actually cheaper in many markets. The price of solar dropped by more than half over the last decade, which is more than we could have possibly imagined at the beginning of that decade. Biodiversity is entering financial regulation for the first time. In the EU, large companies now have to report not only on climate, but on the impacts, risks, opportunities, and dependencies on biodiversity and ecosystems. And the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework exists. However flawed it may be, however rocky its early implementation, it has catalyzed more ambitious commitments from countries on biodiversity than ever, with plenty of local action from local governments and other actors as well. And there's also momentum building toward enabling the critically important roles played by indigenous people and local communities. With an increasing number of countries recognizing their rights to stewardship, and innovative new mechanisms like the Tropical Forest Forever facility finally beginning to equip them with the financial resources they need to do that work at scale. And I want to pause here for just a moment to reflect on this very keynote given at the first World Biodiversity Forum by my IPBES predecessor, the co-chair of the first global assessment, Sandra Diaz. In that talk, she argued passionately and eloquently that biodiversity science needed to lift up the voices of the Global South with special attention to indigenous and local knowledge. And look how far we've come in 6 years, with now a whole chapter dedicated to ILK in the second global assessment, and formal commitments and recognition within the Global Biodiversity Framework. That is a beautiful thing. And so is every species recovery story here, from the monarchs I already talked about, to tigers, to sea turtles. Not to mention the financing that's emerging for restoration in examples I'll touch on a little later. These haven't all coalesced into a paradigm shift yet, but they're the kinds of preconditions that historically have preceded real shifts. So here's my question. And it's the question I want you to sit with for the rest of this talk. When the window opens, and it will, what will we hand through it to a world that's finally ready to take real action toward recovery? Because I think if we're honest, the answer right now is not enough. We'd hand through the same loss reports. We'd make the same calls for more monitoring without agreeing on what we're monitoring for. We continue to lean on satellites because they're available, not because they actually tell us necessarily what we want to know, what's happening on the ground. We'd keep celebrating those stories of rebounds without being able to actually explain them and therefore replicate them. And we'd still talk about our conservation interventions as achievements for one-off project reports instead of experiments that we learn from. We're not ready for a positive future because we've never built for one. And it's understandable, forgivable even. The science of decline got us to this moment, and we will need it going forward. But the science of decline can't carry us through that window when it opens. For that, we need something we don't yet have. We need a science of recovery. So what does a science of recovery look like? I'm going to propose 3 priorities. You might have others, but I think these 3 are essential to the foundation of how we move forward. My first priority may seem like semantics, but I promise you it's not. Right now, the biodiversity community does not have a shared operational definition of what recovery looks like. At what scale? Measured how? Over what time frame? And without that definition, every recovery begins on unstable ground. We can restore habitat, reintroduce species, reduce pressures, invest in protection, but still struggle to answer the most basic question: is the system actually recovering? So here's what I think that definition needs to include. We care about species populations, obviously, but they're hard to measure, and their response time lags, depending on the generation length, sometimes by decades. So we need early indicators that we're moving in the right direction. And I believe ecosystem health is key. First, can the structure and function of an ecosystem predict its composition? And by composition, just to be clear, I mean what species are present, the cast of characters. By structure, I mean how the ecosystem is physically organized, the habitat architecture from canopy to roots, or how patches are arranged or interact. And by function, I mean what the ecosystem does, cycling nutrients, filtering water, storing carbon. So the question is, if we can measure what an ecosystem looks like and what it does, can that tell us which species it's able to support? It sounds academic, but if we want early indicators of species recovery, it becomes essential. In the places where we already have decades of data documenting this relationship, we can do that and then export that understanding to the places where we don't. That's a science of recovery, not waiting for species to come back and then counting them, but identifying the conditions that make recovery possible and then measuring whether we're creating them. And here's where it gets really exciting. We finally have enough data to answer a question we've never been able to answer at the temporal and spatial scales that actually matter. How does ecosystem condition affect its resilience? With decades of satellite data spanning the entire globe, we can look back at how ecosystems have responded to natural disturbances, fires, storms, floods, and identify which ecosystem factors are associated with stability and recovery. That's what we should be measuring toward. And function also ties us to people. We've known for a while that conservation is more durable when communities understand how essential healthy ecosystems are to their own well-being. But our best ecosystem service models, and I'm partly to blame here, still assume that if the ecosystem is there, it must be doing its job. We need to show the value of a forest beyond the mere presence of its trees. We need to demonstrate that healthier, higher functioning ecosystems deliver more to the people depending on them. So that's the definition of recovery I'm proposing. Not a return to some imagined baseline, but a measurable trajectory toward ecosystems that are functional, resilient, and valuable to the communities who live with them. And those communities include the indigenous and local communities who have been living with these ecosystems for millennia and have better insight to guide their recovery than anyone else. So getting recovery right in specific ecosystems, planning as well as measuring, will mean listening well. Okay, if priority 1 is about knowing what recovery looks like, priority 2 is knowing whether we're achieving it. We have an extraordinary and growing toolkit for measuring biodiversity on the ground. Camera traps, acoustic traps, environmental DNA, and satellite remote sensing at resolutions we couldn't have imagined a decade ago. But even as the technology has proliferated, costs have, as ever, become an issue. We can't count on research grants that end after 3 years to build the long-term data sets we need if we want to detect whether our efforts to support recovery are actually working. And we can't just base everything off those early indicators forever either. We do need to verify that we're getting the outcomes, the long-term outcomes we want. So we need a sustained, sustainable funding model for building learning into our recovery efforts. And that's not what happens now. Right now, the conservation community mostly scrapes together grant money to watch the damage happen. The actors creating the impact, the industries, the developers, the supply chains, should be funding not only the restoration activities to mitigate the damage, but the infrastructure to learn from it. If you're transforming a landscape or a seascape, you should be paying to manage and measure recovery from that transformation. That's not a radical proposition, by the way. It's how it's done in medicine, in engineering, in every field where accountability matters. Now, I use the word learning here instead of monitoring because monitoring alone isn't enough. We need to learn for real as a first principle, not just occasionally. And to truly learn, we have to measure real outcomes and be willing to report our failures. Because failures, I know we all say this, failures provide the most valuable lessons. But we need to believe that because right now, we bury them. Think about how venture capital works. They let 1,000 flowers bloom. They expect 9 out of 10 investments to fail. But the one that succeeds delivers 10 to maybe 1,000-fold. The key is that they learn from every failure and retool. The tech sector takes big risks, but it fails fast so it can try again with better understanding. Now, I know biodiversity doesn't have the luxury of failing fast. Ecosystems have lags, and some losses are irreversible. I'm not suggesting we treat ecosystems as startups. But we do need to adopt that same learning mindset. Every policy intervention, every restoration project, every conservation intervention should be treated as an experiment, not some checkbox for our reporting requirements or a way to get another grant, but an experiment designed to teach us something so we can keep learning and improving every time. Now, my third priority is maybe the most provocative. When political windows open, they open fast and they close fast. And I'm sorry to say, I think our science community's habitual response to political opportunity is to call for more research. I've done it too. We need to break that habit. What if instead we had translation-ready packages? Not universal solutions. Recovery is inherently local and context-dependent. But what if we had frameworks that let us move fast? Frameworks that say, okay, for this type of freshwater system, this is what recovery looks like. This is how to measure it. This is how much that costs. This is what you'll know in 3 years or in 10. Not one-size-fits-all answers, but a scaffolding for generating locally specific answers quickly. Remember, the Montreal Protocol didn't succeed just because the science was clear. It succeeded because the science was deployable. The pathway from diagnosis to action had been pre-built. So when the political window opened, the scientists didn't say, give us 5 more years. They said, here's what to do. Biodiversity recovery needs that kind of readiness. And every country in the world already understands this for other sectors, by the way. You don't wait for the earthquake to design your emergency response. You pre-position the supplies. You train the responders. You map vulnerabilities. You build the plan before the crisis so when it comes, you activate. You don't improvise. We apply such discipline and foresight to disaster. Why can't we apply it to opportunity? Because the opportunities are already coming. From the recovery efforts being made possible by the EU's nature restoration regulation to a $120 million debt for nature swap in the Bahamas, from Ethiopia's $500 million nature plan to restore degraded lands, to the financing for restoration being mobilized by Brazil's $2 billion new climate fund. We're seeing big pushes for recovery emerge all over the world. Now, there's still a huge biodiversity financing gap, as Michael just said, and obviously that has to be closed, but we're not even making the most of the opportunities we do have. What will we hand the next emerging opportunities? Can we quickly provide recovery frameworks, learning plans, and timelines for measuring results? Can we have portfolios of investments ready to go, optimized for recovery, costed, designed, and backed by evidence? Or will we still have to answer every new call from scratch? Or worse, miss the window completely? Nobody in our field is really talking about this yet. I think we have to be. I started this talk by saying I'm tired. Tired of only delivering bad news. Tired of being only an archivist of loss. And I think many of you may feel the same way. We didn't become biodiversity scientists to preside over decay. We became scientists because we believe that understanding the natural world can change its future. And it can, but only if we build the science equal to the moment. The question isn't, will the window open? The question is, will we have something ready when it does? Something real, something specific, something that can move at the speed of political opportunity. And how are you going to help deliver that? What can you do? Well, the good news is it's not earth-shattering, but it is a mind shift. You're already asking interesting questions. That's why you're here. I invite you to ask them for recovery, to lean into ecosystem health, to help us converge on what recovery actually means so our measures are all building toward it, to lead with experiments and learn from, not hide from our failures. Maybe we can't single-handedly change funding models, but every single one of us can recommit ourselves to the real outcomes of our work. And here's the part I most want you to take with you. The best way to hasten the window, to make it open sooner, is to start planning for recovery now. You can do that through your modeling and scenarios, through your pilots or experiments, through your storytelling. You can show what a beautiful world biodiversity recovery can make. That's not a passive bet on the future. One of the most powerful things we can do as scientists to bring a different future closer is to show that it's possible. That's how we change the world. Not just by being ready for the moment, but by being the reason it arrives. Define recovery. Build the infrastructure to learn from it. Ready the science for action. That's the work. Let's not wait another day to begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky. Thank you. Wonderful. A very powerful talk. I think we got our homework for this week, I guess. And we'll discuss a lot. Becky will be with us in a few minutes again, so you'll have another chance to listen to her. But I now would like to lead into the panel, to the opening panel. And this panel will be about leading transformation together, and I think we already know from the science side what is in front of us. I wanted to invite Fiona Harvey to the stage now. Fiona Harvey is an award-winning journalist who has covered the environment since 2004. After working for Financial Times, she is currently the editor environment at The Guardian newspaper. She has written extensively on every environmental issue, spanning from climate change, including climate COPs, air pollution and biodiversity, to ocean plastic, covering ecosystems from the Amazon to the Arctic. And those who know me, Arctic is especially important. She has interviewed many of the world leaders, including Antonio Guterres, Ban Ki-moon, Tony Blair, José Manuel Barroso, Noam Chomsky, Michael Gorbachev, and Sir David Attenborough. It is a real honor that she agreed to moderate today's WBF 2026 opening panel. Fiona, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And thank you very much for all coming here today. That was an absolutely inspiring keynote speech, and we're going to hear more from Becky as well shortly. She's going to be on our panel. Our panel is going to, well, it's going to take you all into the realms of leadership. You're all either leaders or potential leaders here. This Congress is about how we turn leadership into action, how we take our science and our research and bring that forward into actual transformation of the world of biodiversity, moving us towards recovery, away from just documenting decline. And I've got a fantastic panel who are going to talk about just that for you. I'd like to invite them all onto the stage with me one by one. First of all, we've got Joji Cariño, who's a Senior Policy Advisor at Forest Peoples, who's going to give us the Indigenous people's perspective, joining us actually from Philippines. Thank you very much. Yeah, please, thank you. Yeah. Come and sit down. I'll welcome back to the stage Becky Chaplin-Kramer, who we've just heard from, and we will have more questions for. Yep, come on. We've got Henry Gandhi Odhiambo, who's a research associate at the African Conservation Centre and University of Nairobi, an early career researcher who's going to give us the perspective of the next generation. Come and join us, please. Thank you. We've also got Rosalind Helfand, who's from the California Global Biodiversity Alliance, the co-founder of that, in fact, and also PAJE Consulting. She's going to give us the subnational organization perspective. Come and join us, please. Thank you. We've also got Klaus Lützenkirchen. He's from Siemens, where he's corporate vice president looking after environmental protection. So that's going to give us the business perspective, which is going to be very important too. Come along. And finally, I'd like to welcome onto the stage Wendy Smith. She is here today from the University of Delaware, where she is Dana J. Johnson Professor of Management. She studies paradox, which I think is going to be very useful to us, and she can give us a leadership perspective on that. Come and join us, please. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for all joining me up here. We're going to look at the topics of leadership, transformation, togetherness, working collectively. We're going to look at how we can pool our knowledge, indigenous knowledge, scientific research, lessons from business. We're going to look at leadership and how we achieve this transformation, how we all become leaders. So I'm going to turn to you first, Klaus, because we know that the business sector has an important role to play in this process. We know that we talk a lot about leadership in business. So what can we learn from you? And what will make businesses, chief executives, leaders of business, what will make them act on biodiversity? I mean, we've seen the fear of financial losses because we keep telling people that actually you can't have a thriving economy without a thriving planet. Will that not make any effect? Or will it be belief in business opportunities that actually persuades them? Give us the perspective from business, Klaus.
So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity also to talk about this, because I think in reality it's a sequence. So risk, from my experience, puts biodiversity first on the agenda of CEOs. At least it was in our company the case. But from my experiences, transformation scales when they see opportunity. Opportunity in terms of resilience, in terms of efficiency, in terms especially also to develop new portfolios and technologies. So at Siemens, biodiversity is both in the end. It is a kind of like management of risks, but it is much more an open and strong source for innovation. Innovation from resource efficiency to circular-driven AI and technology-powered solutions, which all count into biodiversity. That's my experience.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Welcome.
But why do you think businesses don't get this? Everyone in this hall gets why this is important. What is it about all those business people who don't get it?
I have a lot of experiences also in exchanging with other companies or other businesses also. I think getting this on the agenda is quite difficult because it's always the risk which is in the beginning discussed. And the opportunity is missing. So we should prepare to see this as a package. And I think this is why it's so hard, because risk, I think we have done this for years in terms of governance or compliance. So they trust us that we can manage this. But the opportunity part, which is the most interesting and much bigger interest of them, we have also to learn how to get this across to them and to open these windows for opportunities that they see it. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles.
Brilliant, thank you. And do we need to change the way that we speak to business?
Definitely. Definitely. Right.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll hear more of that shortly. I'm going to move on now to you, Henry, because we're talking about transformation, we're talking about how we move from the old paradigms to what Becky was talking about, being recovery ready. We need to get the next generation on board if we're going to do that. So what will your generation do differently?
Thank you. That's an interesting question. And before we talk about what my generation will do, I think it's important to build on what the generations before us have done. And what Becky has presented is, first, for example, is look at the science. What progress has science made to this far? Where are the challenges? So I think it's important to understand the question of where the problem is and where the opportunities are before we build towards the future. So my generation, which actually cuts across, we are not leaders of tomorrow, we are leaders of today and tomorrow. So we balance both. But we recognize that for us to lead transformation together into the future, we have to learn across generations. We have to build momentum across disciplines, across sectors, across regions. For example, Africa, Asia, Europe, we have to work together. So the unique thing my generation is building on board is break the silos, listen more, because I think it's important to understand that we have to really understand the challenge, but at the same time listen to where the opportunities are taking us into. So my generation is ready to be bold and to be able to work across science, policy, practice. So there's a discussion around how do we lead across that interface. We will not continue the siloed approach. We are willing to learn, we are willing to change, we are willing to make bold moves into the future. I think that is the hope that we have as we probably move towards recovery. I think we have to be very, very bold in terms of how we lead into the future. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, go on, yeah, please. I encourage you to show your appreciation throughout this because, this is a very interactive process and our panelists need to know when they're saying things that are resounding and resonating with our audience. So, yeah, please do. Thank you. And just on that, Henry, just what inspires you?
Sorry?
What inspires you?
Quite a lot. I talk to generations from different ages. As a young emerging scientist, what inspires me is to listen to different people, and particularly the task ahead of us. If you look at 2050, those scenarios, as a climate scientist, to look at what the future looks like, for example, So in terms of action, what inspires me is the kind of action that is needed to outpace the scale of the challenge. So for me, that makes me feel like we need to build critical mass, and I feel like the young people, the future leaders, have to act now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on now to get the perspective from Indigenous peoples. As we've heard, Indigenous people have always played the critical role in sustainably using natural resources. So, Joji, everyone talks about transformation, transforming society, transforming the way we do things so that we can actually recover biodiversity. Can you tell us, please, what's the most important thing that Indigenous peoples and their knowledge systems can teach us, the things that modern institutions, some of which we've seen a lot of here in Davos, modern institutions just haven't understood?
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Becky. I think to understand Indigenous people's role in transformation, we need to understand exactly what is happening in Indigenous people's territories. Because most of the world, and in fact many here, think of Indigenous peoples as few traditional persons in remote places. In fact, 1 in 20 of the people in the world is Indigenous. Beyond that, we speak more than 5,000 of the 6,000 languages on Earth. We actually live on around 30 to 35% of the land area of the world. And in these areas, biodiversity is still intact in many, but also biodiversity is in decline. Cultural diversity is in decline, the same as biodiversity, but it is declining less than in other parts of the world. And what is this telling us about Indigenous peoples? It is telling us about the science of recovery, because we need to understand why in these places we have less diminishment of biodiversity than in other places. There must be something happening here that we need to understand. And what it is that culture and the natural world, we also refer to it as Mother Earth, we have co-evolved, we have worked together. We live from nature and we support nature. Therefore, it is that close relationship and reciprocity that is allowing biodiversity to flourish in our areas. And what is different from Indigenous peoples? Even within the global biodiversity framework, we see nature as separate from people. Even in the sciences, we are there for observation rather than co-evolution, but that, of course, is now changing. And the science framework, which is actually our main knowledge system, is not yet working closely with other knowledge systems, like indigenous and local knowledge, which are very, not only complementary, but transformative. So beyond, to understand what is needed for transformation, we need to understand what is it in our values, in our knowledge, in our practices that is actually changing the world for the better. And I think that transformation can move across many fields in an allyship between all of us and indigenous peoples.
Thank you very much for that. That's very encouraging. Thank you. Becky, I'm going to come back to you now. Thank you for that amazing keynote. You talked in that about the need for readiness and to have our recovery frameworks and so on at hand to seize any opportunity. But I can't help thinking of all the many, many, many reports, recommendations, studies, calling for action, calling for change, calling for transformation, and we haven't had it. So what I need to know from you is what makes the difference? We saw from you some examples of where recovery does happen, where we are successful. So what's the difference between these reports that gather dust on shelves and the collaborations that actually deliver results?
Yeah, thank you. That's, I hope they're not just gathering dust. I like to think of them being laying in wait for us to mine when needed. But it is true, I think, there have been many. Now, this is the 13th IPBES report, this second global assessment. So, there are a lot of those resources to draw on as well. And every one of those reports has a chapter in it for action, for options for action, and speaking directly to policymakers. They also have a summary for policymakers. So why don't we see this groundswell, this change? And I think what I'm starting to come around to is that the options are still too abstract, too generic, and there's a ton of information going into these reports that is really helpful. But if you really are implementing something on the ground, you need the plan for that system, specific and tailored to that system. And I feel like we do have that information, we just don't always package it that way, and that could be the job of NGOs and consultancies. Maybe it's not solely the job of academia, but I do think that we need to up our game a little in terms of recognizing the handoff. And part of that could be through co-development, right? I do think that we've had a recognition of the importance of co-developing solutions with decision makers for a long time, but I also think that I recognize how long that takes and how many years of building trust and developing that relationship in a place. So I think that we can sometimes use information brokers or boundary organizations more. We can make more use of those organizations that have already built those relationships and seek out partnerships with those organizations instead of going straight to this decision maker, because they already have kind of built a lot of that necessary social capital, I guess. So I think we just have to it's not that we're doing the wrong things with these reports, and I think the intent is there and it's always good, but we can start to get a little more traction, I think, if we can be a little more tailored to the individual opportunities, which probably isn't going to be in a report, but should be translated. Those lessons from the report should go into subsequent activities, policy uptake activities.
Okay, and then we'll be successful.
Yeah, I think there's a better chance. But we have to keep trying, right? We have to keep trying things and learning from them. So,
brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to come to you now, Rosalind, because we've seen limited progress, and that's putting it kindly, at the kind of the highest level, at the international level, when governments and world leaders and so on come along and meet and tell us what they think. It seems to me, and I'm sure it seems to a lot of people in this hall, that actually we might be able to get more progress at a subnational level where perhaps we face fewer of these barriers. So can you tell us, please, what you think subnational organizations can do to make a difference?
Yeah, so I think that we're getting pretty frustrated right now with lack of action by national governments on biodiversity. We see a lot of actions happening, but it's not adding up to transformative change. And I think that subnational governments, in partnership with subnational organizations, including down at our local and city levels, have an opportunity to work together to really accelerate change, to meet goals that we have under the Global Biodiversity Framework, commitments that have been made by parties to support subnational and local action and to enable them to implement the Kunming to Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, and also to meet goals that we have under the Transformative Change Assessment that also really speak to the whole of society and whole of government approach. So the California Global Biodiversity Alliance is doing this by seeking to push for mainstreaming and integration of biodiversity into decision-making at every level. And we're seeing a lot of good response to this by engaging elected officials, decision makers, government officials, together with organizers with these global processes so that we have this exchange, an exchange between what's happening at the global level and what's happening at the local level, and then using that exchange to accelerate action on biodiversity at every level, an uptake of biodiversity, so that we're pushing from the ground up, but we're also meeting decision makers who are at those top levels as well.
Excellent, thank you. And what advantages have subnational organizations got?
I think that subnational organizations tend to be a lot more nimble. So we're really able to plug in more directly with policymakers. I think when we talk about the slowness of decision-making, the slowness of policymaking, it doesn't actually have to be that way. You can go a lot faster, but you have to be really smart about it. And when you're working together, when you're uniting different stakeholders, when you're uniting the activists and the communities and the grassroots organizations on the ground with your subnational, your city, your county, your state, your provincial, your territorial leaders, your tribal leaders as well, that what's happening is everybody is identifying gaps together, they're collectively working on solutions, and we are seeing an increase in California, although we are working US-wide as well and with international partners, but we are seeing an increase in uptake on biodiversity, and we're seeing it happen faster than I think many would expect.
Okay. That's encouraging. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I'm coming now to you, Wendy, and you have a fascinating job because Wendy is an expert on paradox, among other things. And it seems to me that here we are killing our own planet, destroying our own life support systems, and calling that economic growth and progress. I can't think of a bigger paradox. So I'd like to know about what your research, what your thought can teach us about how we navigate this paradox and how we achieve biodiversity transformation.
Thanks for the easy question. I want to just start by saying thank you to all of you. I am an outsider to the community of biodiversity, and even within the last 24 hours, and just in awe and deep appreciation of the amount of work and science that you and translation that you have all already done. So I want to start with tremendous gratitude and appreciation. What I have been doing for the last 25 years is studying leadership. Big L, people at the top of the organization, little l, leadership all around, about how we indeed navigate translation, transformation, and particularly studying paradox. And paradox is a science of navigating competing demands, opposing pressures, tensions. In the last 24 hours, I have heard so many of those come up in this community. Business versus economy, business, economy versus biodiversity. Within this community, do we advance existing systems or transform existing systems versus get rid of them and introduce new systems? Do we navigate through Western wisdom or indigenous and local people's wisdom? How do we think about being incredibly passionate versus pragmatic? The tensions are real. And so I want to just say maybe two things. One is that what we know from our research is that navigating those tensions effectively and creatively requires us to shift our mindsets. We talk about paradigm shifts in the science of biodiversity. We need paradigm shifts in our leadership mindsets. I have some colleagues who have done some research and pointed out that while we need to start when we talk with businesses to address the business case and speak in the language of business, the most effective ways to engage really creative solutions is moving toward a language, a paradigm, a leadership model of holding the both and, of paradox. And we know that. I've heard the language of paradox emerging here in conversation. It's the language of being able to, in organizational science, we have Janusian thinking, the Roman god Janus, look both ways, two-eyed thinking, holding different types of knowledge systems, weaving together opposing ideas. The issue is how we do that effectively, because it is, and by the way, our research, the research that I've done with my colleagues, shows that being able to shift those either-ors into an and results in much more creativity. It invites us to not solve the either-or. We're not trying to solve for, we are never going to solve for these opposing pressures of being either pragmatic or idealistic. We're going to hold that tension and allow it to come up with something more creative along the way. Doing that's not easy, and that's what I've spent the last 25 years trying to figure out, is how do we do that effectively to teach leaders how to do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's brilliant, because we do need leaders to understand that. And we've got a big topic for leadership coming up, actually, because I'm sure everyone in the hall is aware of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, otherwise known as IPBES. IPBES, and they've done a global assessment already. It was, I think it hit us all in the face like a sledgehammer, that assessment. It was certainly pretty breathtaking. But we're having a second global assessment, which is a huge task and responsibility. Becky, you are working hard on the second global assessment. So I want to ask you, why do we need a second assessment? Because we had that first one, and it was huge. Yeah. And so what couldn't we answer in the first assessment that we are going to answer in the second?
Did I turn it off? Hello? Oh, wonderful. Yeah. That's so interesting. That's your question, because my question was, why did it take so long to have the second? The IPCC is like clockwork, they're coming out every few years. Why are we waiting 10 years between ours? And I think the answer is, why do we wait, is partly because these are slow variables, a lot of the things we're measuring, and so it does make sense to have maybe a longer cadence, because we don't expect to see change happen quite so quickly. But there's a lot to report in 10 years. They're actually one whole big part of the introduction is going to be just taking stock of the changing landscape. And Aichi hadn't even come to pass yet. The Aichi targets were in 2020, so that was before, the previous global assessment was before that. So I think there's certainly a lot of change, political change that has happened in the ensuing decade that we need to understand and get our heads around. How do we provide the right science in that changing landscape? But two big things I think that are different. One is the chapter on indigenous and local knowledge, and this was an interesting decision. They had discussed keeping it all woven together everywhere. You talk about weaving different opposing ideas. It's really important, I think, to this community, and IPBES has done more and more work trying to understand and elevate these voices through dialogues, through other means of bringing this kind of knowledge in. So they have been doing that all along, but finally realized, okay, this needs to have its own attention, its own place, and it will be woven through the whole assessment, but for it to have its own chapter, which is almost like a mini assessment in itself of indigenous wisdom, I think is so important. And that is something that has not happened in any of the previous assessments, the last global assessment or any subsequent assessment. So it is a huge step forward, I think, in our embracing of this wisdom and understanding how to not integrate, how to not smush together, but really bring these things alongside each other and understand how Western science and indigenous and local knowledge can really inform us and lead the way to recovery. The other big difference is just that there have now been 12 assessments. There's so much knowledge to build on that synthesis is a huge piece of this, because not every decision maker has actually probably read every report. Some of them are just sort of looking at these global assessments of like, where are we? So there's a huge task of just pulling together. We had the Nexus assessment that was water, climate, biodiversity, health, and food. What are those responses that cut across all of those sectors? How do we integrate and find the combinations of solutions that will get us across all of those goals? And then the transformative change assessment just happened, and that was somewhat abstract for some decision makers. It was hard for all of them to fully latch onto. How do we really enable and prime the system for transformative change, not just incremental change? So our role, I think, is to really pull this into the actionability side and really trying to make this ready, and especially for the 2030 goals coming due. This will be right after the report comes out. We'll have that COP and need to really make the plan to transition from we scrambled to 2030, and now we have to really achieve to 2050 that harmonious vision of nature and people thriving.
Thank you. And what can all of the people here do to help you to make this impactful?
Oh, thank you so much for asking that question. We are out for public review right now, external review. Please register to be a reviewer. It is not like peer reviewing a paper. You don't have to read the whole thing. You can read one page and make one comment, and we will still take that seriously. And it really takes a village. We need to hear all these diverse views so that we know that we're capturing everything that needs to be.
Brilliant. Well, you heard it, so get cracking. Thank you very much. And so we just heard there, Joji, about indigenous peoples and their involvement there. I want to ask you, because we hear a lot about this, but how can we make those commitments to listen to indigenous people and to involve indigenous people in this in a collaborative way? How can we make those words real?
Yes, thanks very much for that question. And I'm so happy that IPBES, the leading science body, has already taken those steps to set up an approach, to set up mechanisms, and to seriously work with indigenous and local knowledge. But if we look more broadly on how this is actually happening across sectors and across society, it was only in 2007 that indigenous peoples were recognized to have human rights. That's how many years ago? Because prior to that, the UN had not actually recognized our collective rights and even our individual rights. And so there was a lot of discrimination, marginalization, and oppression happening in many countries. So if it was only that recent that indigenous people's rights were recognized, how is it happening across other sectors? In funding, only 1% of climate and biodiversity funding goes directly to indigenous peoples. Even in conservation biology, the bulk of the research and the attention given is indeed to loss, not towards regeneration and where we have success. In governments, I'm so happy that the CalGBA has firmly put indigenous peoples and local communities as key actors. But in the most recent global review, we are not yet present in terms of the actions and our contributions. So whole of society and indigenous peoples are not yet present in our reporting and in our global review. And just across society, the understanding of indigenous peoples is still very superficial. And for example, now that there is a lot of policy recognition of the importance of indigenous peoples, what is actually happening? For example, we're invited into advisory groups, but the purpose of these groups are mostly instrumental for their own purpose. So they say, this is our agenda, please come in and try and inform our agenda. But that could be instrumentalization or co-optation. And now what is happening, for example, in business, in many of the projects for nature-based solutions, they're being made transactional, whether or not our knowledge and our lands can in fact be supportive of further financialization and commodification. So there is still a wide range of areas where we really need to take seriously allyship and partnership. And if that is taken seriously, this is what will lead to transformation, because it requires us to think of other ways of doing, not business as usual in our institutions, and not just saying, yes, indigenous knowledge is important, how can I use that? But rather, how can I work truly with indigenous peoples and local communities to give them the real support, the real understanding, and the transition and transformation required to change our ways of being and our ways of thinking. So I would like to propose that we actually need a new field of research and policy that is focused on the presence of indigenous peoples, their care for territory, and our close relationships with nature, because it is those values, knowledge, and practice which is actually also at the core of the science of regeneration. So I'm calling for that new field of research and policy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that call. I think that really resonated with people. I'm going to come to you, Henry, because as well as looking to indigenous people, we also need to involve younger generations in these collaborations. We don't always succeed. What are we doing wrong? And how can we better involve the emerging scientists and leaders into our projects?
Thank you. I think that's a question of leadership and capacity, if you look at it in general. And for a long time, we have been talking about capacity development, but essentially, you develop a capacity, but you fail to nurture that and transfer it. That has been the big challenge. And the capacity needs, that we have, even before we look into the future, vary across context. If you look at the barriers in Africa, the barriers in Europe, if you speak with any young emerging leader, the challenges sometimes are cross-cutting, yes, but I think the obstacles that we have in different areas vary. An example is talking about constraints in funding. Because for you to do good research, you need to have predictable funding to support that. That's one. But two, that being addressed, you still have to look at how do you communicate it. So if you look across the entire spectrum of the obstacles that we have or that we're dealing with right now, I would say a lot of them are bureaucratic. And one may blame the system in terms of systemic issues that we have across funding, across publications, across representation in platforms like this. But at the same time, the emerging leaders also have a responsibility in terms of pushing the agenda, be part of the agenda setting. I think there's still some laxity in terms of change making. We believe that changes can only be made by people in the boardroom. But I think there's a paradigm shift into the future. We are seeing a lot of clamor for being part of the solution. An example is 2 years ago when I came for this conference. I remember sitting at the back, and I thought of myself like, how can I be part of this voice? And speaking with Cornelia, the president at that time, and she listened. So that is one barrier being addressed, being able to democratize the platform for communication and for learning across different generations. But it is not the only thing. I think we have to think about where the challenges are at the local level. Indigenous areas where people have different issues. Because the challenges we have, biodiversity loss, which is globally felt, but in terms of impact, you realize is felt differently by different communities. So if you bundle all these together and have leaders that move into the future, you realize that the challenges are varying. But we are committed to changing the entire landscape together. So I think if you asked me, I would say, into the future, we need to dismantle, first, bureaucracies that then impede change making, and two, we need to really nurture and transfer capacity, because we can't complain about funding all the time, we can't complain about lack of access to platforms, but what are we doing as young people? So I think in the room here and many other places, I think we need to ask ourselves, it's a reflective moment for us to see what role do we play as emerging leaders, rather than complaining about systems that are not favoring us. What are we doing as emerging leaders? Yeah, so I think it is both ways. We can blame the systems that design solutions, but what are we doing to be part of the solutions? So the obstacles are quite a lot, but I think how to transform them from challenge to opportunity, I think that is important. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yep. That's a very valuable perspective. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'm going to continue this theme with you, Rosalind, because you have founded your own organization. You've been a leader. You have helped women to bring forward women as leaders as well. I'd like to ask, we want everyone in this hall to leave this conference as a leader. So what is the key skill that you would have everyone learn, please?
So I want everyone to start thinking about coalition building as a key skill that we should all be really thinking more deeply about and looking at how we capacity build to be stronger and better coalition builders. So the California Global Biodiversity Alliance was founded on this idea that the future is really in strong coalitions and also super coalitions. So super coalitions is this idea that we're going to bring coalitions of coalitions together and we're going to keep building that out. But it's really hard to do this. It's easy to get a bunch of people to say, yeah, we're all on board with this same thing and we're going to partner up and blah, blah, blah. It's another thing to make sure that that movement is diverse, that you're continuously reflecting and bringing new groups in and new perspectives in, that you're managing continuous participation in discussion that's inclusive and co-creative, and that you're figuring out how to resource that effort too. Because the investment in coalition building is very low right now. So a lot of investment in biodiversity work and climate work is still very project focused, right? So investors want to see short returns, but coalition building takes sustained and ongoing investment, and it takes a lot of staff time, it takes a lot of people power, it takes a lot of management. So we really need to see a lot of really great skill building and thought around how do we get investment in sustained coalition building, and how do we continuously build and diversify and make sure that we really understand what it takes to do that. And one last thing that I want to mention about that is that a lot of our coalition building is framed around this idea that the global biodiversity framework is a holistic approach, that there's something in it for everybody. Whether you're working on pollution or classic conservation or cities or indigenous rights or justice, it's all there, or gender equality. And so having a framework like that and using that to build out your coalition is incredibly effective. And again, I'd love to see more investment in thinking about how do we build capacity for that.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, we do need to build that capacity, thank you. And that leads me actually to, I'd like to continue that theme with you, Wendy, because we are pouring investment into things that harm us, that harm our planet, that destroy biodiversity, and we are starving of investment, the things that actually would lead us to flourish and lead us to recovery. So why is that, and how can we bring about the transformation that Rosalind was just talking about?
I mean, I wish I could tell you. That's beyond my pay grade a little bit in terms of understanding the decision-making around the investment. But what I do know, and I want to pick up on something that Becky said earlier, which is how do we take and value the investment that we have to use it more effectively? And what's the capacities that we need in order to do that? How can this community move that conversation forward? And again, I'll lean into the expertise that I do know, which is about leadership and the mindsets and the skills that we need for leadership. I was reflecting as I was coming over here that about a year ago, I was in Zurich once before at a CFO roundtable. It was a dinner. There was a small number of CFOs. And they were talking about the relationship that they had with the sustainability folks. As we were talking at the beginning of the meal, these folks were incredibly excited about all the sustainability work. Now, I know sustainability already has a challenged argument here at what it's doing, but there was a deep commitment to these businesses maintaining some kind of efforts toward addressing environmental and broader climate issues, broader biodiversity issues. And by the time we got to the end of the meal, and this was a small group and people had had a couple of drinks, those finance folks were pretty down on those sustainability folks. Those guys over there, all the money that they're spending without a return on investment or what have you. And I say that because it is clear to me, and by the way, it's clear to the science in social psychology. We have an idea of social identity theory, the way in which we easily devolve into us-them mentality. If I want to invite you to do it, it's to think and listen how quickly we get into the us versus them. And to be clear, what we know, and by the way, there is value in having the us. The problem is when we villainize the them so much that there's not a relationship or an ability to work together. So if those finance guys, are saying them about all of you, note that all of us in this room are saying they about all of them. And that brings us to a place where there's not conversation to be able to work together. And I just want to say one quick thing about that. What we know in the research that we have around holding paradox, around holding the both and, is there's a couple of really key things that have to happen, and we know a lot, but just at a high level, I want to invite us to think about two. One is that we have to start changing the language, is to notice how quickly we say or, how quickly we say them. Should we focus on small incremental wins or local successes, or should we focus on large systematic change? And change that to an and question. How can we use the local wins to enable systemic change? How can we address systemic regulatory policy issues to support those small wins? Because that's what invites the creativity. And the second thing I want to invite us to do in terms of, and by the way, if there's homework, if there's a challenge, it's to notice over the next couple of days when that or comes up and what it looks like to switch to an and. And the next really brief thing that I just want to name, and Becky and Joji, this is, I think, where you guys were, is that what we also know in holding these tensions is that we've got to create space for these opposing points of view. Some have more power or attention than others. We talk about that as separating, as pulling apart, as listening, as raising up, as lifting up. And we've got to figure out how to connect. We've got to separate and connect and then weave them together so that we have a better solution. So there's value. So the importance of the leadership skill of listening with curiosity to understand differences in service of enabling that kind of connection. So there's much more to say, but I'm going to stop there in service of time.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That was very much to the point and very punchy. Thank you very much. That's great. And Klaus, we've been talking about business here and, getting them involved and getting finance and so on. You've done this. So give us an example of how we can do this successfully. Tell us what we need to do.
So I think it all started with looking into your own operations, right? But the real shift is happening then when you are influencing entire value chains, including suppliers and customers. And we at Siemens, we have a lot of them. We have more than 400,000 suppliers. We have millions of customers for millions of products. So here the real transformational change is happening when you influence them. So we learned at Siemens that it all starts internally to build up strong internal capabilities. Capabilities that you need for creating awareness, but also to creating transparency, that you need to develop strong assessment tools and also to teach people how to apply those assessment tools and how to interpret the results out of those assessment tools. But then also you need strong internal capabilities for power and impactful local actions. And this means both to identify the right local action as well as then to implement this action. So this is all what we learned. And when we want in the next step now to accelerate this to the entire value chain, which is not only suppliers, it's also customers and others, it would need, from my point of view, three things. First is we have to create transparency about impact and dependencies across all tiers and not only our own operations. Secondly, we actually have to partner up in a totally different way. So collaboration and partnership with suppliers is required at a totally different level because compliance alone will not do it. And thirdly, as we heard already here from various other participants, we have to much closer link biodiversity to a business logic in terms of resilience, risk, and performance. And then I believe strongly it's a transformation of a system and not of a single company alone. So we have to do this together.
Thank you. And we heard from Wendy a bit of that kind of, the tendency that we have to separate into us and them. And I'm afraid I'm slightly guilty of that a bit in some of my questions. But how can we transform this so that it's no longer an us and us and science, them and business, but actually just a global we?
Yes.
How do we?
Me, right?
Yeah.
So and we as business and we at Siemens are very grateful for a lot of indices which create awareness. So this helped tremendously to create awareness and also to bring the topic on the agenda of our top managers and our CEOs. But from my point of view, we don't need more indices or not that many more. As we heard already from various other participants, what we would ask as a business is much more to have a practical decision-making guidance. And I think the issue is not the awareness. The bottleneck is really in a practical application of actions. So when we first started Siemens to influence and develop all the things internally, what would my wish for bringing us closer towards also science, on the one side is help us on the where to focus topic, means a clear spatial prioritization. Secondly, it is what to focus on. So is it land use, is it water, is it pollution, etc. And then third, what works on in terms of a kind of like practical intervention with measurable outcome. And I think then, when we work together on those topics, it will make a transformation change, because then we go from awareness creation based on indices to a practical guidance how we together can transform and have a real impact. And here's for me the real request for science. Please help us turning biodiversity from a pure reporting topic into a management system, starting with the measurement, prioritization, and later then the execution. And I was very happy, and we are not aligned, right? So we didn't align before, but it fits very well to your opening keynote speech. And this would be the same request from our side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've heard from business at its best there. Thank you very much. That's great. Listen, we've got about 10 minutes left, and I've got some questions that I could ask our panelists, but we are doing quite well for time, and I wonder if we might be able to just squeeze in some questions from the audience. I think we can, but we've got to be very quick. So I'm going to take the first three hands that I see going up on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. And there, I see a gentleman there. And I see a lady just behind you there. And I've taken one from here, one from here. Does anyone wants to put their hands up over here? Yeah, we've got a person in the front. Great. So there we had the gentleman there.
Good morning. My name is Nand Kishore Agrawal. I come from India and work closely with indigenous community in northeast of India. So it's actually great to hear that there is a dedicated chapter on indigenous community, a very good right step in the right direction. But when it comes to action, it's always like us versus them when it comes to action at the indigenous community level. It's people versus government and businesses. The community, the indigenous peoples often feel, and not totally wrong, that if we are not strong enough, they will take away a lot of rights and resources from us. So what do we as a facilitator or as a government agency should do to bridge this gap, which is like us versus them, to really see that businesses and governments recognize them, not only recognize them, but also channel the funding and find right ways of supporting them and removing their fear that this will be taken away. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's a great question. Thank you. We had a lady there, just if you pass the microphone along. Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Julie Dimitrovic. I'm a senior technical specialist at Fauna and Flora, so a conservation charity based in Cambridge, but I sit on the business and nature team. So I want to, first of all, say thank you for such an exciting opening panel. I wasn't sure what to expect when I came here because I normally join business events. So this is great to see. And what's really resonating with me now is the idea that we need to develop coalitions and leadership skills that translate information across sectors to inform decision making. And so my question to you is, where do you see those coalitions starting from, and how do you balance power so that those with funding and financial resources don't tip the power balance away from those who live in communities on the ground who need to restore nature? And what does that governance structure look like? So thank you.
Thank you very much. Great question. Thank you. And finally, I think we had a gentleman over here. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Matt Oliver. I'm a professor of oceanography at University of Delaware. My question is for Becky. Oftentimes what we see in the background, like with the examples that you gave of ozone, you can think about the Clean Water Act, is there's sort of like an engineering solution lurking in the background that comes up. And I was wondering if you had thoughts about engineering solutions as it relates to biodiversity targets.
Great question. Thank you very much. Engineering solutions are key to this as well. Thank you. Great. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give all three questions to our panelists, and I'm going to come along this way, so that everyone gets a chance to answer. So Becky, you'll get a chance to answer that specific question, but everyone will get a chance to answer everything. Joji, let me just run through the questions again. We had the question from India on indigenous people and bridging the gaps between indigenous people, business and government that can sometimes exist. We had this question on where do we start with building coalitions, and finally we had the question about bringing in engineers. I'll give you the floor to begin.
Yes, I'm so happy the issue of power was brought up, because indeed we live in a very centralized world of power, and we are embedded in institutions that make it very difficult to think of us rather than them. But I've spent a lot of my life in policy work, and I have actually seen the changes happen in persistent dialogue and persistent evidence to convince powerful states, corporations, for example, in the World Commission on Dams, and researchers and our vast community that indeed we need to work together. So the CalGBA was a happy solution. It was widely applauded, but we really need to implement it. I don't see very many governments here, and governments are really needed to be enablers, because currently in the report, they're not yet doing that as a very good job. And indigenous peoples and all of us, on the matter of coalition building, it really can be done. It needs dialogue, it needs talking, it needs honesty, it needs persistence, but it also needs commitment and hope. Because if you continue to have this hope that the common good will triumph, biodiversity will revitalize and regenerate, not only in 2030 or 2050, but right now through our actions, then I still continue to have that hope and aspiration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think there's a couple layers to it. I think on the one hand, you're saying maybe like some of those solutions could be solved, some of those problems could be solved with engineering alone, basically. Stop spraying those aerosols, whatever. And that's not an option for us. But I think there's also a layer to it of like, where does human infrastructure enter into the equation? Where I think about it a lot in terms of nature's contributions to people, that we have green solutions and gray solutions. But I think even for biodiversity, we do need to recognize that we live in whole landscapes, these species, landscapes, keyscapes. It's not just our protected areas, it's not just our one-off projects. They all coexist together in this much broader mix that includes a lot of human infrastructure and other human uses that need to coexist, and not just coexist, but hopefully kind of synergize. So I think there is some interesting work to be done in engineering specifically in terms of creating connectivity and being able to live through, with roads and other infrastructures, like how do we allow species still to move? And there are really interesting mechanisms for that. So it's not as easy as turning off the pollutant, but I think that we're seeing more and more opportunities, not just risks, but really like we can build things in different ways that are more harmonious. And I feel like that is really only a partial answer to your question, but we have to keep trying and seeing. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just to add on to that, I think the contribution of nature-based solution in mediating risk that we're facing cannot be underestimated, because as much as we push for engineering, the hard solutions, we have to think about what nature can do. And sometimes actually, if you do cost-benefit analysis, you actually realize that nature delivers more benefits in the long term. So I think it's just important to integrate those two solutions in a more hybrid way. But just to weigh in on the question of where does the coalition building start? In my view, it starts in the mind. Where are we? What is our orientation in terms of, are we willing to be part of the change process? So once we agree that we're a coalition of the willing, and we are committed to the big cause, everything else around governance systems, around how to structure, implementation of such coalition, I think becomes easy. But the most important thing, in my view, is to build that willingness. And I think it's evident here that we're willing to be part of the process into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Rosalind.
Yeah, I think the questions around coalition building and the indigenous people's engagement are actually linked. I think one of the unifying ideas is iterative engagement and listening processes. It's very extractive when you just have a coalition where you're just asking for inputs. It's extractive when you're just asking people who you're working with on the ground for inputs. But if it's iterative and you're building up inclusiveness and co-ownership through your processes, that's where you start to build trust and have a lot of success. And so with the coalition that we've built, the leadership is a steering committee of people from different organizations who are all actually giving their time to this. And we try to be a flattened hierarchy. So we're not kind of a steering committee that's issuing edicts from on high, but we're actually inviting everybody in to have co-ownership and co-power in this. And then we're practicing radical transparency, where everything we do is very transparent. There are no secrets, there's nothing behind closed doors, it's all open, anyone can ask to be part of a process. And we're embracing discomfort in that process too, the discomfort of difficult questions, the discomfort of somebody saying something that you don't want to hear during meetings, and then figuring out how to turn that into something positive that then takes you towards an overall shared goal. So it's okay to disagree, it's okay to not approach things all the same way, but we're going to then use that disagreement to actually create more energy and motivation and figure out how to be working together and flatten some of these hierarchies again, but also practice a collective approach to leadership. And I think that's where you get your success in governance and your success in working with people on the ground. But again, it also takes a lot of thought, a lot of reflection, and a lot of staff and people investment too. And I'd love to see folks, including funders, start to invest that way so that we have this constant reinvestment in inclusion.
Thank you very much. Klaus.
Let me share some examples from our business world with regard to India as well as with regard to technologies. So, and you see also it's very much connected. So, driven also by taxonomy laws for years now, we are not only looking into impact and solutions and mitigation our own operations, but also in the radius of at least 5 kilometers surrounding our premises. And I just came back from India, where we have in Kalwa, close to Mumbai, huge production factories. And here in the surroundings, we have mangrove forests. And for the winter time, I was able now to see this. There were also a huge population of flamingos resting there, coming from Europe. And we are sitting together with the indigenous people of this surrounding to discuss how we together can protect, but also coexist, as you just mentioned. And we're doing this on all levels, also using our technologies. So our water technologies and our biodiversity technologies, which we sell, that our customers can fulfill their water and their biodiversity targets, play also an important role when we sit together with indigenous people or other people. The same happens in our location in Brazil. We own Amazon forest, sitting together with the indigenous people from the Amazon, like also coalition. The same happens in Malaysia, where we own jungle. It happens everywhere in the world. And it's, as you just said, a coexistence and putting all solutions and all also requirements and needs on the table to find a common approach how we can protect, but at the same time also live in those environments.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Wendy, you've got the final word.
I'm going to give you the final word. That's a lot of pressure. I wanted to speak to the question of coalition building and how to do that. What an incredibly important opportunity to lift up the work that you all do, and what an incredibly challenging thing that is to do, as Rosalind was saying in the work that she's done. I mean, I study this stuff. These guys do it. You guys, how many of you have tried coalition building in some form? Right? Like, this is hard stuff. And I would just want to name one of the reasons that it's hard, one of the key tensions, paradoxes, if you will, that comes out is that in coalition building, you're trying to create a collaborative, cooperative effort amid often competitors, and you've got that compete, cooperate tension that you've got to navigate. And so this was a piece of work that I did with some colleagues of mine, actually in the Canadian oil sands. Some of you know the Canadian Oil Sand Innovation Alliance, and whatever you think about the Canadian oil sands, trying to bring together 14 of the most competitive companies to push forward on any agenda around environmentalism when they are all highly capitalistically focused on razor-thin margins is hugely challenging. And if any of you find me, I'm happy to share the study with you, because one of the things that we found is that in order for them to move that forward, they had to indeed shift the language of holding competition and cooperation. There's a great book by Adam Kahani, Collaborating with the Enemy. It's not all pretty, it's uncomfortable, it's difficult, and the question is, can we sit as leaders and hold that tension as we move forward? So maybe I'll just end with a bit of humility. This is something that I feel passionate about, that, you know, if I could have my way, the world would be teaching in business, in non-governmental organizations, in science. We would be teaching both and as a leadership skill next to, as the capacity to hold these tensions next to the way we teach communication or the way we teach teamwork or whatever it may be. And so I'll just do, with a bit of uncertainty or humility, if anybody wants to join me tomorrow to do a deeper dive on how do we do that, I'm going to be doing a workshop tomorrow on both and happy to continue those conversations of what does that leadership skill look like, and how do we hold it more effectively and teach it to others?
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, that sounds like a fantastic workshop. And also, we're going to be taking all of the themes that we've spoken about in this panel will be taken forward throughout the conference in one means or another. So I really hope that we have laid some of the groundwork there for you to all achieve your best at this conference. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to our audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to this wonderful panel. I think we heard a lot. We have a lot of thoughts. All this opening ceremony will also be available online later on. So if it is, as for me, that you had some good thoughts, but you want to rehearse and listen to what they said, it will all be available. I do not hold you up any longer. You're up for lunch, you're up for discussions with your colleagues to prepare for the week. I wish you a very good and productive week, and I see you tonight at the Icebreaker at the latest. World Biodiversity Forum 2026 is officially open.
Yay.